Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Stephen Railston and I'm your host. I'm actually back. Gary Lineker was supposed to replace me on today's podcast, but he has solved out his spat with the BBC. So I'm back in the hot seat, and I'm alongside my esteemed colleagues Samuel Luckhurst and Rich Fay, who were at the game on Sunday afternoon. Obviously, Manchester United drew with Southampton 0-0 at Old Trafford, and we'll get into the analysis of that game throughout this podcast. But first, I'll check on the well-being of my two colleagues. Samuel, how are you?
Very well, thank you. How are you, Stephen? I'm glad to see that you've graced us with your presence. I thought you were off for all of this week, but clearly not.
I signed off a bit too early, didn't I, on Friday? I thought I could get away with not being on the podcast today, but quite clearly not. Rich, how are you?
Yeah, not too bad. I think a bit run down, but under the weather. But being joined by you on the podcast always makes me feel a lot better.
Well, you look absolutely beautiful, Rich, so don't you worry about that, son. Don't you worry. Samuel, we'll just get straight into it. Obviously, a 0-0 game, a goalless draw in the end, but it was obviously marred by that Casemiro incident, which completely changed the complexion of the game in the end. I always like to get your initial thoughts. What was your verdict on the game, your overall analysis, and your takeaway when leaving Old Trafford on Sunday evening?
For 0-0, it was quite enthralling. Rich and I were saying the first half an hour had really dragged, even though there were a few chances in it. It wasn't a particularly absorbing match at all, and then it took off with the red card, and United had a brief flurry towards the end of the half that had inexplicably 1 minute added to it, which was just staggering given the red card stoppage must have been minimum 3 minutes, maybe nearer 5 minutes overall. And although the referee was always going to be the focus of the post-match press conference, I think in the end the result was certainly fair. I mean, Southampton were very adventurous. They were very proactive when it was 11 versus 11. So there's some encouragement for them to extract from it, the way they performed 11 versus 11, 11 versus 10, even though they're bottom of the table. But really, I found it quite perplexing that Ten Hag underestimated Southampton's midfielders, and you've got Ward-Prowse, who is a very, very accomplished Premier League midfielder and has been for a number of years, and Romeo Lavia has been excellent whenever I've seen him play for Southampton this season, having joined from City in the summer. So it was peculiar that United went into the game with one central midfielder, and Bjorn Fernandez, who played pretty well in midweek, is played out of position again. It might have been the first time he's ever actually played in central midfield for United from the start. He has dropped back there during games. I think he did on his debut, but I think he's pretty much started every game as one of the front four, normally, of course, as the number 10, and that tactic didn't work. United did look a bit imbalanced, I thought, after the red card. With McTominay coming on for Weghorst, it didn't leave them with a focal point, really. I mean, Weghorst was poor. His header from Shaw's cross, it was a free header, it goes over the defender's head, was just tame. I mean, it was reminiscent, really, of what a defender would do if they're trying to nod it back to the goalkeeper to defend in that situation. I'm struggling to think of a United player who's started 16 successive games and has played as bang averagely at best as Weghorst, but that experiment might be prolonged this week because of the circumstances. And when United did have Garnacho and Pellistri on for Sancho and Anderson in the second half, I thought they were more balanced because it was more, you couldn't really, there was no confusion anymore there. You knew Garnacho would be on the left, you knew Pellistri would be on the right, you knew Rashford would be up front. And so they looked a lot more settled like that. Whereas with Sancho, who was playing as the number 10, he kept on drifting out to the right-hand side, causing congestion there, deprived United of a creative presence in the middle. And if you've not got a number 10 and the number 9 is barely a number 9, you're going to struggle to create opportunities that way. And so it wasn't a surprise that Fernandez is closer to that number 10 role when he had his shot in the second half, that Gavin Bazunu did brilliantly to tip onto the post. I mean, Bazunu might have got the man of the match award just because of the quality of his saves, but Southampton must have had 4 or 5 really good chances. De Gea made a couple of good saves. Ward-Prowse's free kick hit the bar. There was the Walker-Peters shot that hit the post as well. So it was remarkable it ended 0-0 in the end, because both goals did seem to lead charmed lives. And I could understand where Ten Hag was coming from afterwards, and that he was quite sanguine with the result, and that United had given a good account for themselves, given that they played with 10 men for probably an hour of that game overall, with added time on top of it. There were some very good individual performances in defence. I mean, Rich and I both agreed that Martinez and Luke Shaw were very good. But again, you go back to the attack and the over-reliance on Rashford. And sometimes if Rashford has an off day, as he did at Anfield, and he did again yesterday because he had two excellent chances at I say it 0-0, it ended 0-0, but at 11 versus 11, when his one-on-one, his finish was really quite peculiarly tame. And the one time Sancho did manage to play a pass from that number 10 role he was supposed to occupy, Rashford miscontrolled it, and Bazunu was out to claim the ball. So nothing really new learnt from how United approach games or the state of their squad, etc. But and also the setback of not winning it is somewhat tempered by another false dawn for Liverpool, losing at Bournemouth. And although Tottenham won impressively against Nottingham Forest, as everyone expected them to, it's Tottenham, and I don't think anybody is really, certainly from a United perspective, I don't think they'll be necessarily unnerved by what Tottenham may do over the next couple of months as far as Champions League qualification is concerned.
I must admit, at half time, pardon me, I thought Southampton would get a goal, and especially they came out the traps quite quick. And I was chatting to Rich, who was obviously in the press box alongside you, Samuel, and he said, "Nah, I don't think they'll score." But as that half progressed, they looked a bit more dangerous. And fair play to United because they rallied against it with 10 men. It was a brave performance in the end. Let's talk about that Casemiro red card then, Rich, because that was obviously a huge talking point. In the 34th minute, straight red. He did win the ball at first, but then he obviously does catch the man. I tweeted after my analysis basically saying that for me it was definitely a red card, and obviously got a ton of pelters. So where do you stand on that debate? Because there has been conversation around on social media this last 24 hours whether it should have been a red card, because I think the problem is, for me, yeah, it is a red card, but the wider problem is consistency, isn't it? You see across the Premier League this weekend, the challenges that have been like that, but they have not been penalised yet. Casemiro has shown another straight red, and he's now going to miss 4 games, and that's going to be a huge blow, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, that it is just about consistency, really, this one, because you can see why it was given. I mean, Casemiro's given the referee a decision to make there, and he's followed through, the studs up. And if that goes against United, they'll want a red card. And it's one of those where if you're on the receiving end of it, then you're going to feel aggrieved to have that red card, because sometimes they do go unpunished, but that doesn't mean that this one shouldn't have gone unpunished. And again, that is all that it stems down to. As an isolated incident, then there could be no complaints. But if you look at the wider refereeing decisions and what we've seen all season, then there is obviously got to be a defence there and a case for United to feel hard done by. But it was just a challenge that, sort of reflected the nature of the game, really. United had lost possession again cheaply. They were having to make amends in their own half. Casemiro's gone in too strong there, too powerful on his opposite man. The fact that Southampton players consoled him. I mean, Alvarez was back on his feet already by the end of it, and he was consoling Casemiro. Anthony was consoling him as well. The players who are out there every single week will feel that it was harsh to see someone sent off for that. But I don't think United have any complaints, and I also don't think that they can put their poor performance down to the fact they had 10 men, because they were open and they were porous before that sending off. And yes, on another day they might go and actually win the game if it's 11 versus 11, but they didn't, and they can't change that now. I think there is the positive though. The last season, if they went down to 10 men in that game, they do lose it. And of course they rode their luck at times. Theo Walcott had 2 great chances for Southampton. He squandered both of them. De Gea made some good saves. Martinez, as Samuel said, was excellent. And I think there is a silver lining to it that, United will still see it as 2 points dropped, but last season they probably would have dropped all 3 points in that scenario. So they showed good mentality and did well to rally on and not let it affect them too much. It suited their style of play, really. They could play on the counter-attack and embrace it. But the midfield experiment failed horribly, and Casemiro's red card obviously exploited that further. But even before the red card, United's midfield was a shambles, really, against Southampton, bottom of the table. But their biggest strength is their own midfield. And United, obviously, we'll see it's 2 points dropped, but they might be fortunate to have actually got anything from the game at all.
It's a very good point you make, obviously, about the midfield battle. because that was lost and that was crucial, but we'll get onto that in a moment. I'll just say, lads, never trust Che Adams. He was going up to the referee behind Casemiro's back and trying to get him sent off, and then when Casemiro walked off the pitch, he was like, "Oh, no worries, Casemiro being his mate." So if Che Adams told you the sky was blue, don't believe him. That's just a tip from me. Another refereeing incident then, Samuel, a big debate, a big call was obviously that penalty incident, the penalty claim. Ball went into the box. I think it was Lakocha, kind of hit his chest or kind of hit his hand. I'll leave that up to you. He pulled it away. So it's been said that he didn't have the intention, obviously, to play the ball with his hand. Where do you stand on that incident, and do you think United had a genuine claim for a penalty there?
It was a genuine claim. There's no doubt about that. The ball does hit his chest, which is something that, again, in terms of taking incidents out of context, sometimes people on Twitter are as bad at it as the referees or the VAR with their replays, because they will just present it. Here's the screenshot, as if to say that's a definite penalty. Yeah. When the ball did hit Bella Kotchev on the chest first, and then it hits his hand. I think normally, if it hits a part of your body and then it goes onto the hand, you're quite content without even having to see it. You'd say, well, that shouldn't be a penalty. I think with yesterday's one, his positioning is so clumsy. I don't know how he lost his footing. He must have just tried to adjust, and then all of a sudden he loses his balance. But he's in such a clumsy position. His hand is in an unnatural position as well, which is this terminology that seems to be brought up every time there is a handball incident. And it does stop the ball going to Weghorst. I can imagine there were some United fans saying, and it stopped Weghorst from scoring. Well, it's probably just as well it didn't go to Weghorst, because he certainly wouldn't have finished it. But that's by the by. So I think United did have a legitimate case for that. And they say, well, VAR didn't check it, but the VAR, who was Andre Mariner, he would have looked at it and then he'd have decided, well, that is not a clear and obvious error, so moving on. And come back to the Casemiro incident, that's something that's not really been brought up a great deal. I completely agree that I understand why it was a red card offence, but when you look at it, is it a clear and obvious error that Anthony Taylor gave him a yellow card rather than a red card? There's certainly not a consistent thread there. You go back to the Sabitzer challenge on Feist a few weeks ago. Brendan Rodgers thought that was a red card. I didn't. It was clumsy from Sabitzer to have his foot up like that. He was trying to block a clearance, I think, and in the end his studs go on Feist's shin, and it looked quite bad. But I don't think there was massive intent there or any real nastiness. Someone who was lucky was Bjorn Fernandez last week, when he needlessly and quite snidely left one on Claudio Bravo when he was rushing down to try and block the ball. I thought he was quite lucky not to have been sent off for that, because that was deliberate and it was completely unnecessary. With the Sabitzer one, I think that was just accidental. With Casemiro's, again, you have to have that context of that. His error there is that he can make that tackle without his foot being lifted. He can just slide across the turf. I think if Wan-Bissaka's in that situation, he's probably sliding in and he's winning the ball, and he's not giving a referee a decision to make. Casemiro treads a fine line by bringing his foot up to win the ball, and then of course when that happens, if your foot hits the ball, it's going to bounce up and hit someone's shin. The chances of it are very, very high, and then that gives the referee a decision to make. I mean, I've seen some United fans say, well, Andre Mariner was the referee who sent off Casemiro last month against Crystal Palace. I mean, that was very, very different incidents. What is relevant is that Mariner was the referee for Leicester-Chelsea on Saturday, and this was what Ten Hag mentioned. And there was an objectively worse foul and a similar foul in that game by Ricardo Pereira on João Felix. That Pereira did get booked in the game, but I don't think he was actually booked for that foul. And looking at that foul, it looks like a red card offence. But Mariner on the pitch, the VAR, neither of them thought it was a red card offence. So, I mean, I hate using the word inconsistency with referees, but there's no better word to use to describe them, because this has been a situation that's been ongoing for decades, really. The standard isn't getting any better. We thought with VAR coming in, it would make things easier. I think it's made things worse, because where the standards are all over the shop, there's this system that has been brought in that purports to be objective is being applied subjectively, because the standards are all over the shop. Referees are human, so they're going to officiate games very, very differently. But if you're applying the law, and there is a law book out there for football, you would imagine they are applying it consistently, or they should be applying it consistently, and they're not. And that's the nub of it with this one with Anthony Taylor, in that you've got an incident the previous day where I think Andre Mariner he must have that as the VAR yesterday. He must have on his mind, I cocked up yesterday, not giving that a red card. I sure as hell better give this a red card, even though it's not as bad an offence as the Pereira one on Felix. So we're going to go round and round in circles until the standards of officiating are quite consistent across the board. And I don't think that's going to be happening anytime soon whatsoever.
Howard Webb's supposed to be the saviour, isn't he? But it's not quite working out at the moment. Obviously, he's at the top and it's not made that much of an impact so far. Hopefully, he can only get better. Let's look at it that way. That'll be all for part one. We'll be back in a moment for part two. So, Rich, you discussed the midfield battle earlier on in part one, and it was obviously an important part of the game. Sancho started at number 10, as we expected, and Ten Hag kind of discussed his quick feet and his creativity is the reason for that. But it also meant Fernandez dropped into a deeper role alongside Casemiro. Now, we're not used to seeing Fernandez play that. I mean, he's played in all sorts of positions this season, on the left actually at Anfield, on the right obviously in central attack midfield. So it was probably in hindsight a bad decision, wasn't it, to do that makeshift midfield, because at the end it just didn't work with Sancho in that number 10 position.
No, and of course you can always try and say it's much easier to pick fault with the lineup after a game's happened, isn't it? And we can hold our hands up and say that. But even from when the lineup dropped, you were a bit worried that it was a bit too attack-minded. It was a sort of lineup that you'd maybe pick on FIFA or something, just to go for goals. And it was almost like United were trying to run before they could walk. You get the sense that they didn't just want to win, they wanted to win convincingly, to get that goal difference boosted, to get the confidence flowing, to get goals into Weghorst, to really make a statement that they can beat the lower teams in the division with relative ease. And it just backfired, because United, yes, they had an extra player whenever they went forward, but first of all, they weren't getting on the ball enough in the good areas. And when they did have the ball in possession, the players just didn't quite know what their roles were. I mean, so often Jadon Sancho drifted to the right and he was basically man-marking Anthony. And you had Wan-Bissaka, Sancho and Anthony all in the same sort of cluster of space, and there was no one in the middle to pick the ball up when they got it. On the one occasion, really, that Sancho did play as a number 10, he released Rashford and he should have scored a goal. And, it was certainly a formation that has something to offer. You can see why United might want to use it, but it's a formation they should use in the game that they're chasing or when they're in desperate need of a goal, not one that you use from the offset, because it leaves you so vulnerable at the back. And again, as we said, that Southampton, for all their issues this season, their one strength is the midfield. Lavia and Ward-Prowse is a really good midfield, and they've got a lot of creativity and composure themselves there. So United had lost that midfield battle. Like I said before, Casemiro was even sent off, really. There was chances for Southampton on the break, and they only sort of grew as the game went on. And for United, I just feel there has to come a time soon where Fernandez just has to play in his best position, because Fernandez so often mirrors United's form themselves. If you think United's best wins this season, Fernandez has played well himself, no matter what role it's in. And when United play badly, Fernandez usually has an absolute horror show himself. So it's no surprise that those two things go hand in hand. And we've seen that in the last 3 games. Liverpool was atrocious, Fernandez was atrocious. Betis, United were much better, Fernandez was much better. Southampton was a mixed display, and Fernandez had a mixed display because he was overall pretty poor, but he remained United's sort of best attacking outlet. He made 2 big chances in the game, played 2 key passes, and yet United still didn't find a way through. So I think there comes a time when, for all his versatility, Fernandez just needs to play the number 10 again. Because yes, it's great that he will fill in wherever, and he's got that mentality where he's happy to help the team out, but you have to play your best players in their best position. And Fernandez is United's best attacking midfielder. And I know there's a shortage elsewhere on the pitch, and they have to fill in where they can at the moment because they've got this injury crisis and they've got players missing. But I just feel that they should have stuck to what they know. McTominay or Fred should have started. You need someone to do that dirty work, and they just didn't have it from the off. And they went for a team that was a bit too flashy, a bit too attack-minded. And, you playing attacking players is obviously going to give you more of a goal threat when you're in the final third. But if you don't have the players to do the dirty work to get you there, you're never going to get those chances anyway. And I think it was just another sort of reality check for United that the best 11 sort of talented technical players does not make for the most cohesive lineup. And I think, he's got a lot right this season, but I think Ten Hag got his lineup wrong against Southampton.
I've been banging that drum for a while now, Rich, about Fernandez and attacking midfield. So we'll make a band with that. That was my kind of post-Anfield piece. He needs to play in attacking midfield. As you've said, play your best players in their best positions. It's as simple as that, really. I'll open this question up to both of you then. Where is Sancho's best position then? Because he had a tendency to drift out to the right during the game yesterday. His best goal-to-minute ratio at Dortmund was on the left. Regardless, forget who plays on either side and forget competition. Where is Sancho's best position in both your opinions?
The bench at the moment. And that's not being harsh.
That was always going to be the response. No, that's fair enough. But if he has to play, where would you play him?
Yeah, I think he's really good as an impact sub. I think he comes onto games and he can give United that foothold in a match, and he's got the ability to unlock defences. And right now, I don't think he's consistent enough to start on the right. Anthony's going to be playing there, and Rashford's the best player on the left, and Fernandez is the best player for the middle. So for me, I think Sancho is best as a sub at the moment. And if he's going to start, for me, it would be on the left-hand side. But that's not why they signed him. They need him to work as a right winger, and the fact that he's another one of these inverted left wingers just adds to United's problem, really. It sort of sums up his whole situation and shows why Ten Hag did trial him as a number 10. I think there is merit in that, but as we've just said, Fernandez is the player who should be playing there right now. So I'd probably bring Sancho off the bench, maybe try him a bit more through the middle, see if he can really hit the ground running there. But for now, I just can't justify a starting role for him.
The trouble,
he's becoming a bit of an enigma, isn't he?
The trouble they have is that Bjorn Fernandez is not an obvious number 10. Ten Hag tried it with Van der Beek and Kelce, he was useless. I think Ten Hag was...
You're trying to say Weghorst, not a fantastic number 10, son?
There's almost some... it's almost like that Dutch favouritism that we were accusing Ten Hag of in pre-season is rearing its head again.
Yeah, Chong playing, yeah.
But they've not got an alternative to Fernandez there. And Van der Beek's he's out until he's out for the rest of the season anyway. So he's clearly looked for someone who can I make a project of here, and he's happened upon Sancho as that player. But apart from the odd game where he is coming on in games and having the impact, he's not doing it as a starter. And if that's the case, you've just got to play Fernandez in the role where he's at his optimum. But we thought this in pre-season, and it's been a recurring debate, I suppose, during the season. Fernandez is not completely aligned with what Ten Hag wants from a number 10. Van der Beek, when he's actually playing well, is, but he last played well nearly 3 years ago, probably. So there's no point even considering him when he is fit, never mind when he's injured. So looking ahead to next season in particular, there might be something else that Ten Hag has to do there, because if Sancho isn't really cutting it there, he may have to look to someone else, but it's difficult to see who that player would be. I thought Eriksen might have been used there a little bit more often, but Eriksen's played pretty well as a central midfielder this season, and he's injured as well.
Talking about the positive sense, Samuel, Sandro Martinez, I know you picked up on him after the game and kind of said he was really, really in his element, wasn't he? It was almost a siege mentality for Martinez, and we know he's that kind of fiery, passionate character. What particularly impressed you about his performance on Sunday afternoon?
There were a number of times where he was boxed inside his own third, and another defender would have slashed the ball up the pitch, or they'd have cleared it into touch. But his understanding of how to deceive opponents is really, really impressive. In the amount of times he would just keep the ball, he'd sell them a dummy, and then he'd open up the space and he plays a progressive pass, and more often than not, it was starting breakaways for United. And we saw in that Leeds game at Ellen Road last month that he can actually be a game changer. It's not really advisable to use him in that role because you always want him starting, but bringing him on into defence, adjusting the balance, it does free up more opportunities. There are more avenues to explore because his passing is so good. It was a little bit peculiar when he did come off at the time he did, because he was replaced by Maguire, and you thought, well, this is United just kind of accepting that they'll take the draw and safeguarding, just avoiding defeat rather than trying to maybe nick a win, because with Martinez on the pitch, you have got more options there, even though he's playing in he's playing the opposite third to the one that you're trying to get the goal. So that's been one of the most impressive aspects about him all season, in that he is almost as much an asset as an attacker as he is an asset as a defender. And he got booked quite early on for a cynical foul, rightly so. That was 11 versus 11. But as you said, when United went down to 10 men, it did seem to bring out the best in him. And he was certainly, him and Shaw were United's best players yesterday.
David De Gea as well, Rich, a clean sheet. He pulled off some fantastic saves, and you obviously weren't on the podcast last week, but he's funny, isn't he? We go from talking about these mistakes that De Gea does with the ball at his feet, but no one can argue with his shot-stopping ability, because he remains excellent in that area, and he showed that again, didn't he, against Southampton?
Yeah, I mean, he has his flaws, but he has his huge positives as well. And he's so much more often the hero than the villain for United, David De Gea. And of course, there's always got to be the long-term concerns about how he fits into this side and whether United need to make the ruthless call and get someone who is more comfortable with the ball at their feet and more aligned with Ten Hag's ultimate vision for the team. But if you want a shot stopper and someone whose job is to keep the ball out of the back of the net, there's very few as good as David De Gea. He made a good save from Walcott in the first half. I think at the time I said it was a brilliant save, but if he doesn't save that, he'll be back page news again, and there'll be huge concerns for his goalkeeping ability, because it is straight at him. It's a good reflex save. More impressive was the one in the second half when Walcott burst through on goal. Martinez did excellent to shift it out onto his left foot and to force him into a tighter angle, but De Gea did brilliantly for actually not rushing off his line, because a lot is held against De Gea for not being gung-ho and going for his line to intercept balls all the time. He is getting better with that, but when a player's through on goal from that far out, it's actually takes a lot for a keeper to stand his ground and to not come out, because it forces the striker to bring the ball forward and to make the decision themselves. And it put the seed of doubt in Walcott's head. If De Gea can rush off his line, he's got a relatively easy finish. But the fact De Gea stood his ground meant Walcott had to run an extra 30 yards. By the time he'd got there, he'd taken a horrible touch, taken that wide, and he couldn't get the finish that was required to find the back of the net. So De Gea, for all his faults, does have a very specific sort of skill trait there. And sometimes it comes back to haunt him, but I think United have to just deal with the fact that he is their number one goalkeeper to the end of the season, and probably will be long term as well. But like I said, I think ultimately for De Gea, he is so often an unsung hero in these games. It was the same against Leicester a few weeks previous as well, where United go on to win that comfortably, but without De Gea in the first half, they lose that game. So I think that the brilliance of De Gea is just that he's so often understated. And of course, he has these games where he makes ridiculous saves and he makes a string of saves. You think of that Arsenal game a few years ago where he broke the Premier League record for most saves in the match. But the brilliance of De Gea for me is just that every week he seems to make at least one save, where any other goalkeeper, you'd be saying that's a career highlight. And for De Gea, it's just another day at the office.
I must say, though, about that Theo Walcott chance, if that was a quicker player, I think they would have scored.
Yeah.
His lack of pace, really. He's a pensioner now, isn't he, for Walcott? So he was on a Zimmer frame going for an goal, and that kind of messed up the opportunity. Rich, we talked about it on Friday. We talked about De Gea long-term or in short-term, really. What would you do, and where do you kind of weigh in on the debate about his future? Because there's obviously a decision to be made that he's in talks currently with the club over a new deal. Do you think it's now a position that needs to be prioritised in the summer, or do you think United can go another season with De Gea as their first choice goalkeeper?
I still think that whoever you bring in is not going to be as good at stopping the ball as De Gea, so whoever you buy won't replace him as the actual number one heading into next season, but you need to have a viable understudy, because for all his brilliance and all that glowing endorsement I've given him, even if he has a stinker, he's not getting dropped, because you're not going to play Heaton or Butland for a sort of meaningful Premier League game. You just aren't, unless there's an injury and you're forced to do so. So I think United need to get back to that dynamic they had when De Gea and Henderson was a real question mark every single week. They need to have someone who's a proper challenger and someone who offers something different as a backup, someone who is really comfortable with the ball at the feet. You think of like David Raya at Brentford, someone like Sanchez even at Brighton, someone who's a bit more in that modern mould, really. And ironically, the two keepers who have replaced him at international level as well. And I think you just need to have someone who really is there and a viable alternative now. I think that's what De Gea needs, because, worst case, it means De Gea performs better than them and he keeps his place. And if not, then you've got someone who can come in and make a real difference. And I do think there's going to be a moment where Ten Hag has to make a ruthless call. And for all his brilliant service, you still do get a lot of problems of United's own making from David De Gea. The distribution, his hesitancy when the ball comes to the box at times. Like I said, it can work to his advantage for those long-range 101s. But yeah, I think that if United really do want to have the total control and be a team who dominates matches, then it will stem from their goalkeeper. And De Gea still looks like a bit of an awkward fit on that one. So I think short-term, De Gea is the number one, but they need to get someone who's a viable challenger to that spot.
You've not mentioned the perfect candidate for that role, Rich. A world-class goalkeeper, brilliant shot stop and great for his feet. It's Martin Dubravka. He should come back to
I thought you were going to say Tyrone Marshall.
Ty conceded. How many goals in the media game, as we always bang on about on this podcast?
About as many as De Gea conceded at Anfield. I thought
you were going to say as many as Dubravka conceded. That's fair enough then.
But at least we scored.
Very true. Samuel, if we look at the changes that were made with 20 minutes to go, obviously Pellistri came on and Garnacho came on. I was quite surprised at those changes, actually. I thought they were quite brave, both lads, obviously younger lads. What did you think about the impact they had from the bench? Obviously, it was a shame that Garnacho went off his injury. And could you also give an update on Pellistri's future? Because I noticed you've obviously wrote a line about what could happen this summer regarding his future.
I think Pellistri's had 6 substitute appearances now, and in maybe 5 or 6 of them, he's made a notable contribution, whether that's been to create a goal or have a key role in a goal. And he did pretty well again yesterday. As you said, it was quite brave of Ten Hag to make those changes, but it was also logical. United were more balanced with those 2 young whippersnappers either side of Rashford, fresh legs. Rashford against Walker-Peters was certainly an issue in the second half, and Walker-Peters put a good cross in before he did hit the post. And Garnacho is obviously not an obvious winger to bring on to try and counter Walker-Peters, but it was a classic case of the best form of defence is attack, and he did get him, but he didn't really have a lot of joy against him either. He got injured with a tackle by Walker-Peters that was completely legitimate, and then you've had some racist morons online leaving racist comments in Walker-Peters' comments section on his Instagram page, and Kelsapri's Instagram haven't taken those comments down. Unfortunately, social media is we do our utmost to keep our head above the cesspit, but it's an ongoing struggle. You don't want to be dragged down to the pond scum, but unfortunately you do have it flung at you, even though you try to avoid it. So not a surprise, but that's the way of the world these days. But with Pellistri, it's not a surprise that United are planning to let him go out on loan again next season. I think the interesting aspect of that more so is where he does go on loan, because if he goes back on loan to a La Liga side, having had a couple of spells with Alaves, he might as well just be sold to that La Liga side eventually, because he needs to play either for a Premier League club on loan or a championship club. I'm not saying a championship club would be beneath him, but for the stage he's at his development, where he's a 21-year-old, he's a full Uruguay international, he needs to be aiming to get a Premier League loan move. And there are certain Premier League clubs where you'd think there would be logic in sending him there. Just thinking of one club like Brentford, you could see him maybe having a role for them. If Southampton were to stay up, I don't think that would necessarily be a bad move. That said, I can't really see Southampton staying up, unfortunately, for them. So if he is to go on loan in England, I think it does need to be to a Premier League team. If he doesn't, then I don't really see him have a long-term future at United, which would be a pity, because he's clearly got something about him. And not only is he a good player, but he's got a good attitude. He had to wait more than 2 years to make his debut. The wait for that debut was quite peculiar, even though he did spend quite a fair amount of that time on loan at Alaves. But it was overdue. When he has come on in games, he has had a good impact. And it's not like he's just coming on in games where United are coasting and they're winning easily. He came on against Leeds at Old Trafford with United 2-0 down, did brilliantly to keep the ball. That led to the first goal from Marcus Rashford. He's killed off certain games as well with the contributions he's made. And so he's a very useful game changer. And also he's ahead of Anthony Elanga in the pecking order now. That was reflected again at the weekend when Pellistri was actually named in the squad and Elanga wasn't. So going back to the previous point about the midfield issue, I think if they'd not started Sancho against Southampton, which I don't think any of us really had him down in our personal teams to start, their personal preferences, they're not predictions, as we have to keep on stressing ad nauseum. But if they'd had Sancho, Garnacho and Pellistri as 3 game changers to come on, that's quite a deep attacking bench in a season where United have certainly been not short of quantity of attackers, but they have been short of the quality of attackers, and that would have been a better balance, I think, if they needed to call upon them in this parallel universe where Sancho doesn't start the game and they have 2 midfielders up against Ward-Prowse and Lavia. So Pellistri could still have a big impact before the end of the season, and certainly this Betis game in midweek, I would suggest that's a good opportunity to give him a long overdue full United debut.
I have to ask you, Samuel, am I getting too old to be considered a young whippersnapper at 5-a-side now?
You've been around the block now for a while in Manchester, I think. Yeah, I think you've been on our radar for 4 years. So yeah, as
he's like Andres Pereira, isn't he?
Yeah. I think Ronald Koeman
said, is that an insult? Is that a compliment?
Well, he's been quite good for Fulham this season, but Ronald Koeman said that Ross Barkley was no longer a young player that time when he was 22, and it was probably a fair point given how long he'd been playing professional football. So yeah, the goalposts have changed there.
I think Rich is trying to tell us I need to move away. He wants rid of it. He wants us to
Find
go to
your
Flamengo
level.
or Brazil. On that note, we'll end part 2 and we'll be back in a moment for part 3. So Rich, moving on from that game at the weekend, we return to Europa League action, the thrill of it on Thursday night, and it's a game against Real Betis away in Spain. Now, the first leg, it's essentially killed the tie, hasn't it? It was a brilliant response to the Anfield defeat and a convincing win in the end. So I wanted to ask you, do you think we'll be able to see, what do you think we'll see, rotation from Ten Hag? Because we'll know that he really doesn't like to rotate his team, even when it seems absurd not to. In my opinion, Thursday night's a great opportunity to rotate. You saw De Gea after the game at the weekend discussing the toll it's taken on the players. So do you think he will rotate? And also, what do you think of Ten Hag's policy on that? Are you a fan, or do you think you should maybe tweak it now and then?
It shows how high the stakes are this season, doesn't it? That he's always been quite reluctant to do so. He's always emphasised how important it was to win a trophy. So I think that's why for the Carabao Cup run, basically, I think other than that Charlton game, there wasn't as much change as most people would have liked to have seen. And like I said, just because Ten Hag has to deliver. I mean, whenever a United manager is appointed, they always sold the line of we will back you for a few years. But ultimately, if your first season is one of failure, your head can be on the chopping block. And Ten Hag has known that he's had to deliver the goods this season, and he has done so. And he's done so with a core of players who he can rely upon, and they've formed the backbone across all the competitions. And of course, Thursday night does represent an opportunity for United to make a few changes, but it's the penultimate game before the international break. So there's no real need from Ten Hag's selfish point of view to do so, because after the Fulham game on Sunday, he didn't need to worry about things for another 2 weeks. And of course, Casemiro's red card now means he's not going to play in the next 4 domestic games. So he should play against Betis, because otherwise he's not going to play again for a long time. And obviously you can say, well, maybe just give him a rest, give him a prolonged spell out of the team, but he'll want to play, I'm sure. I'm sure he'll be eager to get some minutes under his belt. In defence, Varane's played a lot of football at the moment. You'd say it's a sensible decision to rest him, bring either Lindelof, if he recovers from his illness, or Maguire back in. And of course, you can play Shaw at centre-back as well, get Malacia in. You give Martinez a bit of a rest if you wanted to. But we've spoken about how many attacking sort of options United have, but you still get the sense that Ten Hag will stick with the ones he trusts the most, really. It is a very comfortable cushion. United would have to have a disastrous result not to go through. And you can have the safety net of playing someone like, saving someone like Rashford for the bench. I don't think he should start by any means, but considering the injury crisis in midfield, no Eriksen, no Van der Beek, we'll see if Sabitzer is back or not. One of the senior players is going to have to play there. We've said Casemiro, and then he's been so reluctant to use Fred and McTominay that one of them will at least have to start, but you wouldn't expect both of them to. And maybe this is the game where Sancho should have started as the number 10. It'd be interesting to see if he's given the chance to do so. I think there'll be about 3 or 4 changes, but I don't think it's going to be as wholesale as some fans want. I think it's still going to be a case of get the job done, don't have any complacency. And like I said, it's been a real horrible, grueling fixture schedule for United, but there's light at the end of the tunnel now. And from Ten Hag's point of view, if they can get through these next 2 games, then he can have a week or 2, almost a fortnight off without having to worry about player fitness.
Are you looking forward to your trip to Spain, Samuel? And logistically, have you sorted it out? Because I seem to recall I did offer the pack a lift, didn't I, when we were at the press conference? I said I'll do it for cheaper than, was it a bus price they were quoting?
The bus price has been sorted. Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, we won't require your...
I won't be needed.
Doubtless loyal and reliable services for that. But it's, I'm almost qualifying for Spanish residency. The amount of times I've been there in the last 12 or 13 months. United have obviously played Atletico, Real Sociedad, Barcelona, now Real Betis, and of course the training camp was in Cadiz, and they played another game in Betis. So I've had the privilege of going to the Betis Stadium, which is pretty good. It looks like a nice area of Seville as well. But Seville is beautiful. For those of us who are fortunate to go there for the Champions League tie 5 years ago, it's a great city. Very, very pretty.
When you look at the remaining teams in the competition, Samuel, it's very, very winnable, isn't it? When you actually look at who's left in. I think Arsenal are obviously the biggest threat, but
yeah, it's probably a more competitive. At the risk of getting ahead of ourselves, it'd probably be a more competitive final field than it usually is for the Europa League, in that there are some clubs there that do seem genuinely bothered about winning it, and it could salvage certain seasons. Sevilla have not had a good season in La Liga. I'm not too sure where they are now, but it wasn't too long ago that they were actually in the relegation zone after a good chunk of the season had been played. Juventus have had their points deduction in Serie A, so it's highly unlikely they'll finish in the top 4 there. So if they win the Europa League, they get into the Champions League through that back door. Arsenal, I suspect, are quite sanguine if they do somehow go out to Sporting Lisbon. It's quite finely poised, that tie, but they have got home advantage. And then Feyenoord, I think, are top of the Eredivisie at the moment. So although the quality of the Eredivisie isn't particularly great, you can't really... you can't really write them off. I think they're playing Shakhtar as well, and if Shakhtar do get past Feyenoord, you've got this narrative of a team from Ukraine possibly doing remarkably well in European competition, and what would be an uplifting story for the people of Ukraine, given the conflict that's gone on there in the past 13 months. But United are obviously going to be, at the moment, they must be, if not the favourites, one of the 2 main favourites. Roma are obviously still in the Europa League and look like they're going to get past Real Sociedad as well. So that throws up the prospect of United going back to Rome and encountering Mourinho again. I think Leverkusen look in a decent position to get through, but they're not playing particularly well in the Bundesliga. And you've got the Xabi Alonso subplot there as well, where he's manager of them. So it's not an underwhelming field, and United were quite fortunate in 2017 that they did pretty much avoid all the relative big hitters left until they got to the final against Ajax, and they completely schooled Ajax that evening. It was I remember Peter Bosz, the Ajax manager, saying in his press conference afterwards, I think his first words were, "It was a boring game," which was quite a decent way of trying to conceal his bitterness, but he just didn't have any answer for how United set up to nullify Ajax that evening. yeah, I mean, provided United don't somehow screw it up on Thursday, there's a good chance that they'll have quite an enticing tie in the quarterfinals. And of course, you can draw teams from your own country. So should Arsenal get through, there is the possibility that they'd get Arsenal in the quarters.
It would be impressive if they messed that up on Thursday with that advantage. Rich, do you detest the international break as much as me?
I think as a Welsh football fan, I'm quite looking forward to it.
I thought you were going to say that. That's why I asked
the
you.
new era of Wales with our new look team. It'd be interesting, but I mean, for me as well, personal point of view, the National League doesn't stop because of the international break. Let me tell you that.
Exactly.
So it'll be difficult United wise to maybe take too much from it, especially if they don't win either of the games this week. But from my own personal point of view, no, I'm relishing the international break, believe it or not.
The only man in the country that must be looking forward to it. Oh, among the other thousands of Wrexham fans, to be fair. Well, to end the podcast then, Rich, obviously we've just discussed it is the international break coming up now. This part of the season, how would you assess United's campaign so far? Because look, Carabao Cup win, still in contention for the Europa League. The Premier League chat has finally died down, as me and Samuel were laughing about yesterday. But it's been a very good season so far, hasn't it?
Exactly. I think this just needs to be that sort of reality check to see how far United have come, and particularly since the World Cup break, they've really sort of made the statement that they are the third best team in England. Obviously, they've had their highest moment of the season and their lowest moment of the season in recent memory. But all in all, you've got to go back to last summer. This is even before those first two defeats of the season. Everyone said the United season will be a success if they finish in the top four and win a trophy. They've already won a trophy and they look certain to finish in the top four, and you'd say top three as well at that, because even if they continue to drop points, I can't see any other team being consistent enough to punish them for that, and particularly not two teams to punish them and for them to drop out. So I think you've just got to take a step back. Obviously, the context of the season, how it's gone on, there's always going to be a greed and desire for more trophies and for United to finish as high as they can, but you've got to just look at how far they've come, and it's a real solid basis for building into the next year ahead. So yeah, I think you've got to say United have done a large part of what we wanted from them this season, and yeah, it'd be interesting to see just whether or not they do actually build upon these solid foundations, or if they find a way to not do so.
We'll leave it there then, gents, because I'm off to watch the under-21s at Lee Sports Village tonight, so I need hat, gloves, 7 layers on, so it's going to take us at least 3 hours to prepare myself. Thank you very much, Samuel. Thanks for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you, Stephen.
And thank you, Rich.
Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy Lee. Let's put it that way.
I absolutely love Lee Sports Village. And to the listeners, take care. Have a great week. Thank you very much.